all of you to this talk about how to handcraft a learner-centered education. Now, if you think about it, a homeschool education is a handcrafted education that focuses on the unique strengths, challenges, and passions of the individual and the family. By its very nature, this sort of learner-centered education empowers students by honoring how their unique brain works, who they are as an individual. This type of education is the most likely one to help people get to be, young people get to be whoever they want to be in this one wild and precious life, even when they're not so young. Now, I know that's something that all of us want for our children. So let me get started, my full screen, and I'll talk to you about how you might incorporate some of these learner-centered, some of the tools that it takes to have a learner-centered education as you handcraft your child's education. Let's start by defining this. A learner-centered education centers on the learner and their learning. That's the heart of a learner-centered education. Now, you might think that all educations center on the learner and their learning, but I'm actually talking about more of an individual. This is what I want you to think when you're designing your child's education. When your child was born, the day your child was born, you took one look at that baby and you thought to yourself, this is somebody that has never been on the face of this earth before and is never going to be on the face of the earth again. I have given birth to an original. We understand that, and then too often we hamstring learners so that their all learning looks the same. It just doesn't make any sense. If you've got an individual who has never been on the face of this earth before, then what about focusing on the learner when it comes to their learning? And that's what I'm talking about. Now, a learner-centered approach is an academic approach, but it's one that honors how learning best happens for the child. It doesn't mean that there aren't elements that look the same as other people's, but it does mean that some thought is given about how to handcraft an education that really honors their unique brain. It engages, a learner-centered education engages learners in the act of learning. By putting the act of learning primary and central to the child's learning, to their education, you are honoring and acknowledging the very act of learning for that child. And so if your child moves faster or slower through materials, or if something's not a good fit and you need to change, it's okay. They're different. And as long as they're learning, you can relax a bit and recognize the power in that's what a whole learner-centered education is about. Now, learner-centered education intentionally incorporates learning skills into it. Because when you focus on the learner, you understand that knowing how to work through a math problem isn't enough. The child also needs to be able to access their academics, and I just took math for the ease of it, but you incorporate the four learning modalities, the four different modalities. You incorporate metacognition and executive functioning skills within the context of learning in an intentional way to build those skills so that your child is a more sophisticated learner and that they're actually more skilled at the act of learning. And in this world, this complicated world where we don't even know all the professions that are going to be out there in a decade, if you've got preschoolers at home 2 decades, it's really important that we begin raising children to be skilled learners and put the act of learning as a primary point. So there are 3 parts to this other than choosing the academics. I'm not going to go into choosing topics and subjects in this talk. It really lends itself to its whole talk. And I would have to know more specifics about the cohort of people who are here. One of the first things you need to do is figure out who your child is as a learner. If this is something that you have never taken the time to figure out, now's the time. It will help you when you choose programs and curriculum, and it'll help you as the primary educator for your child. And if they go back to school, it'll help you to know who your child is as a learner, how they process information. the lens they see as they learn the world, the lens they use to see the world as they learn from it. I'm going to recommend that you incorporate learning skills, that you actually weave learning skills into their academics, that you think about what learning skills your child should be working on and then weave it into their academics. And finally, executive functioning skills. Now, I've separated it out, but I'm going to include executive functioning skills and learning skills. Too often, we can think about executive functioning skills in the context of family life, but executive functioning skills are really important to incorporate into academics. I cannot tell you how many times I have had somebody come to me who want help with their child, homeschooling their child, and they think they're having learning issues, and what they're really having is executive functioning skills that need to be built into their child's learning. And if some of you are dealing with executive functioning skills, you are like, yes, right now, your child, the learner. Who is this learner of mine? Now, I hope you really have fun as you figure this out. I am going to recommend that you make a journal. As you figure out, you journal this, figure out who your child is as a learner. Have fun with this. And you should have fun with it. It can be really exciting. This is something that a lot of people don't think about, but it's just get to know your child better. Okay. So one of the first things that you need to think about is, how does your child process information? Now, I pulled out a couple of examples here, but these are just two broad examples. Children process information more than just two ways, obviously. Ask yourself, so think to yourself, how often does my child ask questions? You know, some people actually work through material by asking a lot of questions. It's sort of an iterative process for the way some people's brains work. Other kids love the facts, and then they're going to package those and put those together. Now, how does your child, how do they process information? This is going to take some observation as you try to figure this out. Another thing to think about is, when your child is coming up with big ideas, do they do it as a solo learner? Do they want collaborative learning? Do they want to brainstorm? Some people actually build off of other people's ideas and then put it together in a holistic way. How does your child best learn? Now, in some of these, for example, brainstorming or collaborative learning, you can work with your child. You can work with your child to help with this, or online classes are great for that. Do you have a solo learner? That is somebody. Now, sometimes you'll think, oh, my child needs a lot of collaborative learning, and someone else says, oh, I've got a solo learner. Both of those extremes, you really have to pay a lot of attention with. Collaborative learning, are they really learning, or is it a social club? Solo learning, you have to keep checking in to make sure that that child is staying on task. So these are different things, though, that you want to start looking at. Another parameter that you want to account for is, does your child need a lot of validation? Now, this can really give you a good indication of how strong their metacognitive skills are. Metacognition, in one sentence, is knowing what you know. And so kids that need a lot of validation often don't know what they know, or they have more of a perfectionist tendency. First of all, I'm going to tell you, if a child needs a lot of validation, give it. I'm educated from kindergarten all the way through upper division college classes. And you'll see people at every single level who need more validation than others. Give it if it's deserved. Make it targeted. Make it well-deserved. Give it. Does your child need a lot of validation? Some people actually are blocked until they hear, especially people who, I've one child who's really had a lot of perfectionist tendencies. He was really blocked until he knew that he had done enough. It's like he wouldn't give himself permission to go on to the next step until somebody said, you did a really good job on that one. Now, another thing, for one way that you can get some answers to this is really fun, and it has to do with how your child chooses to educate. Now, if I were developing an online class, I would think, how is the best way to teach this? I challenge you to think about if you were tasked to develop an online class. Let's say you decided you were going to work for Outschool and you started developing an online class. How would you choose to present the information? That actually gives a lot of indication as to how you think that subject is best learned. So task your child to teach you something. Now, I'm just going to use an example that has come up in my house because we have got a 23-year-old son who's in college, and he's got nieces and nephews who are range in age from 3 to 11. And the 6 and 7-year-old, they all want him to teach them how to play Minecraft. I was curious about something with one of my grandkids. And so I asked him to teach me how to build something in Minecraft. I don't know anything about Minecraft. That actually gave me a lot of insight. And then I was just curious and asked one of my other grandkids who also likes Minecraft how they would teach me. Hey, would you explain this to me? One of them actually got Minecraft out and built something for me, talking me through all the steps, which was a really good way for me to learn. The other grandchild stood there and explained it to me with words. And then I said, I don't fully understand this. They got out a piece of paper and started drawing diagrams. That really gave me a lot of insight into how those two people learn, how they would present that information. Now, closely related to this, but not the same thing, is how your child shares information. When your child gets excited about something or does a little bit of self-teaching, how do they choose? Do they read a book to learn about it? Do they watch a video? Do they want to talk to someone who is knowledgeable? How do they, and then when they are asked to share it, how then do they share that with you? Do they stand there and talk? Do they draw diagrams? These are going to be the classic things you look for. Do they pull out a video, or do they pull out something for you to read and follow along? I think it's really fun to start to figure out how someone learns. And if you don't know how your child learns and you are struggling with picking curriculum and programs that are a good fit for them, I'm going to recommend that you pull back a little, stick with what you're doing, but take the time to figure out how they learn. You might actually find that that's part of the problem. Okay, learning skills. There are 3 areas that I want to cover. Learning skills, by the way, these are skills that I recommend you intentionally build into teaching. And by intentionally, I mean with thought, that you think, I want my child working on this skill. And this is the targeted area. This is how we're going to do it and where we're going to do it. Now, the first of the learning skills is balanced learning, using the best modality for the task. And I'm going to talk to you briefly about how you can handcraft for a multimodal learner, and I'll define that term in a minute. Metacognition. Metacognition, knowing what you know, thinking about your thinking, being able to retrieve information that's been previously learned into current situations. It sounds like something adults know how to do. I've taught a lot of adults. Not all of them. But some executive functioning skills. Now, I'm going to really, when I get to those slides, I'm going to pull out those executive functioning skills that really, I think, are best work done actually within the context of academics. Using learning modalities to optimize learning. There are 4 primary learning modalities: reading, writing, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Now, if you are thinking to yourself, hey, wait a minute, Blair, I read an article, and according to that article, that's learning modalities. This is just, a thing. This isn't really a thing. I wonder when I read those articles if those people have ever taught children. Because if you have taught children, you know that kids will have one or two modalities that they just are naturally strong in, and then they'll have 2 to 3 that they're not as strong. Now, occasionally, of course, with anything like that, you'll be able to give 1 or 2 examples of someone who's just a strong multimodal learner, period, but that's not the norm. And in fact, if you were back in school to get a degree in education, one of the things that they would be working with you on is how to develop materials that use a multimodal approach. What do those teachers know? Well, those teachers of teachers know. They know that if you have 30 students, you will have the 4 different cohorts. You will have kids that are reading, writing learners, visual learners, auditory learners, and kinesthetics learners. And if you want to reach the most students, you should be developing lessons that have a component that will help all 4 of those learners. But I'm not talking about that, because you're not educating 30. If you're educating 30 kids, thanks for being here. But I'm assuming most of us are homeschoolers. Now, I'm not talking about you figuring out which modality your child learns from primarily. Well, I am actually recommending that you do that, but not so that you only choose programs and curriculum that where they can only use that modality to learn from. I'm going to recommend that you work so that you have a balanced learner. I'm going to suggest that you take a multimodal approach over the scope of what they're learning. Now, when you figure out which modalities your child is strongest in, I'm going to recommend that you pair that with their challenging subjects. If you have a child who's a strong reading, writing learner, and you're using a very kinesthetically heavy math program and they're struggling, you might decide you want to keep the kinesthetic approach, but you will probably want to introduce more reading, writing. It will make that subject easier for that child to learn. This is just the unique way their brain puts pieces together. And so you want to honor that. But what about the modalities they're not as strong in? You want to work on those too, because in life, your children are going to grow up and they can't control the way the world, their boss, all the tasks, they can't control how those are going to look. So they can't always control those so that they always get to use the modality that they're the strongest in. And so those modalities that children aren't as strong in, I'm going to recommend that you pair those with the subjects that they find easier. Now, because they're working on learning skills, and this goes for all the learning skills I'm talking about, when you are intentionally working on a learning skill and you're pairing it with academic work, sometimes that academic work they might slow down with their academic work. It's natural. Your brain can only process so many things at the same time. So by intentionally making these important, you want to think about, okay, in language arts, we're working on reading, writing. Well, that's an easy one. But let's say they're good at language arts. That's a natural fit. Okay. But you're going to want to make sure that there's a strong reading, writing component. If they slow down a bit in moving through the language arts, that's okay, as long as they're becoming more skilled at reading, writing, learning. Online classes actually can be a great format to work on modalities. So what you do is you say, my child needs to work on whichever 1 or 2 of these, and then find a class that they're really interested in, that there's a high level of engagement, and so let your child contact the teacher, make sure that some of the materials are going to be presented in a way that they're going to need to use whatever modality you want worked on. Let the teacher know what you're doing, and then say, okay, we need to be working on reading, writing, and so you're going to be you want to take this class. Yay, there's a component, and that's how I recommend you do it. By the way, if you've never thought about contacting the teacher to ask these sorts of questions, go for it. Do it. Metacognition. The ability to use prior knowledge to plan a strategy for approaching a learning task, solving a problem, evaluating results, and modifying an approach. I have taught people that were going in that wanted to be doctors, vets, nurses. And I have seen adults really struggle. And I'm not talking about 10-year-olds. I'm talking about 25-year-olds. I have seen people really struggle with pulling in knowledge from that I'm sure they know and applying it to what they're learning. This is a skill that is not just restricted to K through 12, as I said previously. People who metacognition incorporates previously learned facts, information, and skills into current learning. Sometimes they're things that don't even look like they directly relate and you incorporate them in. And that's, if you look at something and say, wow, if you've ever been in a class with someone and you've thought to yourself, they just get it. I will bet that person has strong metacognitive skills. They're able to make connections across their brain in ways that people who aren't as skilled in metacognition aren't. This skill really helps you know what you know. For students that need a lot of validation, this is the skill that you're going to want to be this is the skill set you're going to want to be working on. Online classes that are comprehensive, presenting materials sequentially can help with this skill. Look for classes with a Q&A section where the answers are either live or in written format. Now, I'm going to recommend, if you really want to work on some making connections, I actually think book clubs are great ways to do that. Why? Because you read a book and then you have to discuss what you read and you make connections across what you read. So, okay, 6 important metacognitive skills. An important metacognitive skill is the ability to retain, retrieve, and discuss knowledge. This might sound like these are 3 different skills. However, the way that you scaffold for them and the demonstration that learners are using them is going to be the same. And this is where in homeschooling, it really shines that we know what our kids are learning. So we know what should have been retained and we can help them bring it out so that they can discuss what they're learning. Self-regulated learning. Now, this is a cyclical process where the learner plans for a task, monitors their performance, and then reflects on the outcome. Now, if you're thinking of incorporating metacognitive skills, don't just write down metacognition, write down which of these skills you want your child to be working on. Okay. All right. So self-regulated learning, the cycle of planning a task, monitoring their performance, and reflecting on the outcome, that repeats as students use the reflection to adjust and prepare for the next task. Now, you can really help with this skill set by overseeing and guiding this process, by having these discussions with learners. When a learner finishes an assignment, discuss what they learned. Make sure that they understand what they learned. This helps young learners, appreciate the knowledge that they're acquiring. I sometimes will have kids that don't really think they're learning. And then as I begin to ask them questions, I'm like, you know this stuff. They just really didn't appreciate how much they had retained until they were asked to begin unpacking it. The ability to think about your thinking in the context of learning new information requires a certain literacy with the words being used. In a learning situation, I want you to think of when somebody doesn't have the vocabulary. This has happened to all of us. You encounter one unfamiliar word, maybe 2. Next thing you know, you don't even know what the paragraph was talking about. It is really important that you begin to build in this vocabulary around topics and around learning. Otherwise, it can keep people from being able to make the connections around the foundational knowledge and skills. Real literacy comes when a learner can use the words in the context in a more casual conversation. And once again, this is where there's such a benefit for homeschoolers who know what their kids are learning. What vocabulary are they using? Are they in a science class? Next time you're out in nature, unpack some of the vocabulary, even if you have to contact the teacher and say, I need a vocabulary list here. Modeling thinking. Modeling thinking is a metacognitive approach that increases students' abilities to transfer or adapt their learning to new informational contexts. To do this, instructors need to think aloud. So when you're trying to work through something, model your thinking. Say, how would I approach this? Start to talk about it. I've got a student struggling with math and they're a multi-step problem. Don't sit down and work it out on paper. Say, let me think about how I would approach this. So I'm actually teaching a middle school, high school level chemistry class, and I decided to use a flipped home model where I have them read ahead of time, and in class, we work through the material. My students, so what happens is I am saying, this is how I would approach this problem, and I'm working through the problem. It's not just on paper or in a video. My students, how well my students are learning the material, it's like, I can't even believe the level that students who were struggling are now working at. It's been an amazing transformation. So I really encourage you to begin to work through how you would do something. If you're not sure how to approach a problem, brainstorm with your student to figure out how you would do it. Get somebody from the outside to help. Okay. Skill 5, perseverance and stick-to-itiveness. Now, this might sound like an executive functioning skill, but the ability to purposely work through the steps for better understanding is a metacognitive skill. Think stick-to-itiveness is a demonstration of this skill. If you have a student that really sticks to something, if you have a learner who bounces from activity to activity without finishing many, that is actually, it impacts their learning. Now, you need to understand, no parts of a project are fun. They just aren't. But some learners will stick to it and work through the material anyway. Learners who generally see, and many studies have been done that have shown that learners who generally see a project through to the end learn more. They have deeper, broader, and more nuanced understanding of knowledge and information, and they're better able to unpack that information in new learning situations. It's always so wonderful when learners can self-evaluate their work, but there's an age and stage to being able to do this. Most young learners just don't have the experience with academic work to be good at self-evaluating their work. Of course, there are also the students that are asked to write a paper. They write 5 sentences and they call it good. That's a self-evaluation that needs work as well. The self-evaluation process is key to strong metacognitive skills. Some learners will need a great deal of explicit instruction and modeling in order to successfully self-evaluate in a way that is fair to the quality of their work. And if you are, many of these skills you can actually model by doing. And if you tend to be kind of critical of your own work, I'm going to ask you to begin to self-evaluate your own work in a way that is more kind and balanced. If you do your best, I told so many students this, if you're doing your best job, you just did your best job. Okay, executive functioning skills. I need to move or I'm not going to get through everything, and I want some time for Q&A. Executive functions are a set of cognitive processes that are necessary for control of behavior and learning. They rely on selecting and monitoring behaviors that facilitate the attainment of academic and life goals. Keep in thinking about the learning and the academic application of these. So the first skill executive functioning skill that should be worked on in the context of learning is adaptable thinking. Adaptable thinking is the ability to problem solve, adjust to situations, and see things from others' perspectives. You can strengthen this by teaching and discussing the perspectives of others. How would someone else see this? I will tell you that live online classes with other students are absolutely fantastic setting to work on adaptable thinking. And it really doesn't matter what the subject matter is, because what your students will, and now you're going to need to make sure there's a live Q&A component so that students are asked to share in class. What you'll see is that your learner will begin to hear from other students who see things differently, make different choices. And that is powerful, especially when you see it be from this point of your peer group. Planning, the ability to think about the future, create a plan, and prioritize work. Prioritize work. That could be hard when you're 10 and it's a sunny day. It can be hard for grown-ups to do. Now, if you have a child that really struggles with planning, I'm going to recommend that you make daily and weekly plans and have them stick to it. Okay, a good solid plan. Now, don't make crazy plans. I will tell you, I'm the worst. I make these plans that if I don't sleep, if I get 5 hours sleep a night and nothing interrupts me for the week, I can get it done. So I'm always rewriting my plans. Don't do something like that. Set your student up for success. I don't know why I thrive with those kind of plans, but set your student up for success and keep the plans really in small, digestible bits. Remember, baby steps with these things that we're working on. Now, just like with these metacognitive, each one of these you should think of as its own skill. Don't work on all 5 at the same time. Self-control. If you have a child that is struggling with self-control, the ability to keep this. So if you have self-control, this is the ability to keep from reacting without thinking or overreacting or shutting down. So issues with self-control can manifest into children that just shut down. I had one of those, to children that act out like crazy. When I had one of my stepkids, that was one of my stepkids, were constantly he went to traditional school with some homeschooling, is constantly getting called into the classroom. That is a skill that is such an important life and academic skill. And so if you're dealing with that, I will recommend that you really be thoughtful about intentionally incorporating that in. Let's say you have a child that you want to hold it together for 30 minutes. And last week they were holding it together for 5, and this week they're holding it together for 10. And I'm just using that as a very loose term. They just doubled it. That's time for celebrate. One of the things that I want you to think about when you are working with kids is to use a growth mindset. A growth mindset doesn't say, "Ooh, it's not 30, you failed." A growth mindset says, you were at 5, now you're at 10 or 6, or hey, you maintained 5 for 2 weeks. Way to go. It's really important that we give a lot of acknowledgement as students are working on some of these very challenging skills. Reward self-restraint. Now, one thing that has been really successful with students that struggle with self-control is to have somebody work alongside them. It's body double them. Now, it doesn't mean you need to be working on the same thing your learner is working on. What that means is that you are working legitimate work. You're not reading the comics while they're working if you choose to focus on self-control, but you both sit down and you do legitimate work side by side. Now, that's going to be really important as the learner either however the lack of self-control manifests, that you remain calm, really calm. And I know that can be a struggle when you have a child that has trouble with self-control. And then help your learner stay focused. There are all sorts of techniques for how to help a learner stay focused. For my stepson, who really struggled, now he's in his late 30s now, but really struggled to stay focused, just lightly touching him would pull his attention back to me. It was very, very, very interesting and kind of lovely. And if you wonder, I did the best of his 2 parents and myself. I was the best at remaining calm when things would get crazy. So I got to be the person working with him. Time management. the ability to organize a schedule, complete tasks on time, stay relaxed throughout an assignment. Now, some people never stay relaxed throughout an assignment, and the way one person looks relaxed doesn't necessarily look that way for another. So you can be light on that side of it. But for students that have to work on time management, I recommend that you organize a schedule, help them organize a schedule so that they set and complete tasks on time. And your child will be really thankful that you did not raise a procrastinator if you work on this skill. They will be very happy in college. It is stressful, really stressful to wait until the last minute, and work tends to suffer. It's stressful in a work situation too. So, but time management in an academic setting is so important. It gives you lots of times to work with the concepts, lots of time to think about your thinking and apply from the previous studies. If time management is really an issue, I'm going to recommend that you plan projects where you can increase the number of steps. So you ask your learner to be in charge of the first step, and you take care of the planning for the next 4. Or you ask your learner to, and then once they're good with 1 step, 2 steps, so that you take baby steps in building in complexity until they can take over the whole project. And finally, on important executive functioning skills, organization. Develop a system for organizing work. Now, when I talk about organization, I am not just talking about materials. I'm talking about organization of thoughts. And for some people, if you have a highly gifted student, an asynchronous learner, student that's got some ADHD, if you have ADHD yourself or any of these, you know what I'm talking about. It can be spaghetti noodles in here. And it can be it is really important for learners that struggle with organization of thoughts, that they're able to sort of, if you think of it as a plate of spaghetti noodles that are all tangled, that have been cooked and are all tangled, if you can gray out all the noodles except for one, now you're going to want to start by making the noodle really short that you follow out. You're going to really want to help them by developing a system for organizing their thoughts and their work. You're going to want a really calm setting so that they can just hyper focus. You're going to want to keep, now it doesn't just start, people who struggle with organization, they can really benefit from their study materials being well organized. And so I recommend that you start there, even if your house functions in kind of like chaos. If everybody likes it to be sort of chaotic, I'm going to recommend that if you're focusing on this, that you start by making studying materials very well organized and scaffold your learner through that organizational step to be more organized in their thinking and with the rest. Just see how well it works for them. Okay. All right. My last set of tips, and then we're going to go to questions. My headset? Do not notice I ignore the chat till the end because I find it overwhelming if I don't. Do not overwhelm learners. If more than 1 to 3 of the things that I've talked about sound like something you should work on with your learners, number them as far as what you think you should be working on now. Do not overwhelm learners. 1 to 3 new tasks is all that they can handle in addition to their academics. Otherwise, you're likely, it becomes a whirlwind and nobody can really keep track of what they should be working on. And it becomes much harder to develop a plan and implement it for you if there's too many new things you're working on, but it can be overwhelming for kids. And it starts to get lost what's really important. Make sure the skill is developmentally and age appropriate. With my grandkids, age 3 to 11, the 11-year-old does not have the 3-year-old does not have the same self-control skills as the 11-year-old. And so I have to be very careful what I'm asking as far as self-control for those 2 cohorts and everything in between. Of course, the 11-year-old's going to be 13 soon. So soon enough. Be very thoughtful about learning challenges as they relate to expectations. Now, if you have any learning challenges that are really affecting, like, for example, the executive functioning side of these, then maybe take a back seat. Maybe let the academics. I'm an academic homeschooler, so I'm not saying don't do academics, but I'm saying step back a little. You will see kids soar through as a learner once they become more skilled at some of these at learning skills that they need work on. Model important learning skills, even if you have to learn them together. If you struggle with organization of thought, it becomes challenging for your learner to understand what you really want when you recommend that their thinking become more organized. So work on it together. When working on a skill that a learner is struggling to master, break it into small steps. Step back and think, how can I get back away from this so that the learner, how can we keep backing away until we're just a page width above where they are right now? And sometimes it takes a little work to do that sort of diagnosis. For skills that learners do not want to work on, build in a reward system. Make them talk to them about why it's so important. And if possible, give your child some choice in how and when they get to work on it. If you've got a student that needs to work on kinesthetic learning and they're really not into that at all, talk to them about why it's important, and then give them some choice about the setting where they're going to work on kinesthetic learning. Scaffold and mentor your child to support their success learning these skills in the same way you scaffold and mentor academic skills. I can promise you that working on these skills will benefit your child's future success as a lifelong learner immensely. Teach these skills rather than assuming your child will acquire them. Most learners, it's just assumed that they'll acquire them. And when I say intentionally, I mean intentionally teach learners what metacognition is, what the skills are in metacognition, and then work on them sequentially. As skill learning begins, one time does not equal mastery. If you see one time is, yay, you finally are doing it, but they haven't mastered it. So don't say, check mark, let's go on to the next one. Continue to give praise, encouragement, and support until the skill is mastered, until it doesn't take a lot of reminding to get learners to do it. And don't add anything even as they get pretty close to mastery, don't add anything until they have mastered that. Education, too often we treat it as a short game. It's a long game. You don't learn everything overnight. In fact, you don't learn very many things overnight. Once you think a skill has been mastered, pay attention. Did your learner master it, or do they still need encouragement, scaffolding, and support to use the skill? And then do not stop encouragement, praise, and support abruptly. And by abruptly, I mean, I'm taking a long range view. If your child takes the time to work on, if your child takes the time to work on something like self-control, and a year from now you realize they really have mastered it, praise them immensely. What a wonderful year that was. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Blair Lee. If you have any questions or you want to reach out to me, you can find me through the contact form on the C Homeschoolers website, or you can email me directly, blair@chomeschoolers.com, or we have a pretty happening Facebook group called C Homeschoolers, and you can tag me into a comment if you there. All right, save. I don't know. Let me just go to, how do I now close this? Oh my goodness. Okay, I don't know what I did. Okay, just save. All right. Okay, everyone. I've got 8 minutes. Julie, are you on? Do we have any questions? Miss Blair, the way we kept it together through the craziness of the slides at the beginning, the way I kept it together. Well, thank you, Leslie. Oh, that was really nice. For anybody who wants a copy of these slides, if you're going to watch this again and you want a copy of the slides where you just have the slides, please email me. Let me write my email address. Okay, just email me and I'm more than happy to provide copies of the slides to you. Now, my volume's up, isn't it? This was really fun. So I usually use a headset. I have some hearing issues, so I usually use a headset. But because none of you can talk to me, I'm using my big mic instead of my headset today. Okay. Do I have any questions? Okay. No questions. I don't know how good that is. So are there any skills that I'll ask y'all questions? Do you have any skills any learning skills that you really want to incorporate into your child's learning? Which learning skills? There's one, there's two. How many of you think you have a balanced learner? See, Julie, I could have used the poll if I knew that we were going to be doing this. I had polls turned off. Any other suggestions with a child that bounces back and forth? You want to work on stick-to-itiveness. You want to choose a subject and decide that you're going to spend a lot of time, maybe even get some buy-in from your child, and then you are going to want to decide that you're going to stick to it for a semester. This is what we're going to be studying. Now, one way that you can actually do that is I'm assuming since we're on Outschool conference, that most of you use online classes. And so for a child that bounces back and forth, why not choose an online class that is semester long? And let your child help choose that class and then insist that they stick with that class. It's fun to bounce around some in your thinking. That was the second time I've heard this presentation and learned, hey, I redid this presentation a bit. This is a presentation I gave at another at the C Homeschoolers conference. To answer the question you almost asked, I have one strongly. Okay, so for a child that bounces back and forth, choose one and then two and then three, and then start to build so that your child sticks with it. Now, the subjects that are the most important, in your opinion, to learn, insist that your child stick with those. Okay. This is the second time. Thank you. Yay. Thank you. I'm going to thumbs up. To answer the question you almost asked, one strongly oral learner and one fairly balanced. It's like running two. Did I almost ask? Oh, yeah. When you have, you want to know what I think is really interesting? So I was watching my son, my now 23-year-old son, before there were a lot of videos, kids didn't really learn that much on videos. Through the introduction of videos, we are actually raising a cohort of learners who learn from video. They're being taught. We're actually teaching young people through the introduction of these teaching videos to learn from videos. It's fascinating. As somebody who's been in education for longer than some of you are old, I'm going to tell you that component is really fascinating. When I first started teaching, the videos were not a major component of learning. It is. It's like running two schools at once. And Kirsty, I've got both of your sons in different science classes, and the way they process information and give feedback about information is very interesting. We'll be meeting back in the stage area in 10 minutes for closing and swag giveaway. I already emailed because, good. Ways to break skills down even smaller for neurodivergent teens. I feel like 5 years ago I was great at this, but now. Okay, so I have a magazine. C Homeschoolers has a magazine. How do you handle learners that tend to shut down? Okay. Vanessa, I'm going to recommend you send a question to the Ask Blair column, and I will answer it in the next. See, this is a great question. This isn't a question that I'm going to be able to answer in 2 minutes. Email me this question and it will be in our magazine. There's a lot of people that would love this. How do you handle learners that tend to shut down? You're going to want to break it into smaller and smaller parts. I recommend working side by side with your learners. Some of the things that you would do with learners that tend to just go, you're going to really help with learners that are shutting down. Try to figure out why they're shutting down. What's happening there? Okay, and then start to be able to diagnose it before you get there. I had a learner that shut down. I used touch. That would sometimes bring my student back. Sometimes I would begin to, just through a discussion, I would go back and I would begin to pull out information. When I see a student start to shut down in a classroom setting, I will backtrack on the information until I get to something that I know they know, and we start from there. I actually use metacognition, where I will back, and once they're able to answer a question, that's exactly where we start from. And then I'll stay there for a bit with the academic discussion. And if they're really struggling, okay, we'll sometimes I'll just end the lesson there with that student, but often I will continue, then we'll move forward just a little bit incrementally. Try to figure out, though, what the root cause is of them shutting down. For some students, it's that they have, I know we use perfectionist tendencies sort of negatively sometimes, but I had a son he struggled so much if he didn't think he already knew how to do something. He didn't want to do it. It made learning really challenging, and he would start to shut down. And we used a lot of discussion. So that was a technique that worked really well for that student. And the other thing I would do is I would do something I call front-loading information, where I would make sure he knew something before we covered it. I would give him a video or a reading to do before we got to it. So when you are tailoring this, you figure out the root cause of this, and then start to tailor some of the aspects of their education specifically for that person. Throw out everything you know from being a student, unless your student is really, really a carbon copy of you, which unfortunately doesn't usually happen. I'm a longtime homeschooler. I want to thank you for being a part of my community. I'm a part of your community too. So please, if you ever have any questions or comments, or just if you feel like you're all alone out there, that is how I ended up beginning to give talks to homeschoolers. Homeschooling can be kind of isolating. I want to make sure you know you are never alone. There's a whole bunch of us out there who are here in support of you if you ever need it. All right, everyone. I hope you have a marvelous weekend. Thank you so much, Julie and Aaron and Outschool, for putting on this conference.